I'm Marcus Blackwell, 47, and after 25 years of grinding through 18-hour days, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices, I built a tech empire worth $50 million. Last Tuesday, my sister Claire walked into my office, with a smile that used to comfort me as a kid, sat across from my mahogany desk, and said 5 words that shattered everything. Family shares everything. You know, she wasn't asking, she was demanding half of everything I'd earned, everything. I'd bled for it, because apparently being my sister entitled her to my life's work. The woman who'd called me a fool for dropping out of Harvard, who'd laughed when my first startup failed, who'd avoided me for years while I rebuilt from nothing. She wanted $25 million simply for existing. But Claire had no idea what she'd just awakened. Some truths, once revealed, change everything forever. The silence after Claire's demand stretched between us like a chasm. I stared at her across my desk, searching her face for any hint that this was some elaborate joke. The Claire I remembered from childhood, the one who used to share her Halloween candy with me, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. "You're serious?" I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire's smile never wavered. "Dead serious, Marcus. Look, I know this might seem sudden, but I've been thinking about this for months. We're family. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. That's how it's supposed to work." I leaned back in my chair, feeling like the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Claire, I built this from nothing. You weren't there when I was eating ramen noodles for months, when I slept on my office floor, when everyone including you told me I was crazy for leaving Harvard." Her expression hardened slightly. "That was your choice, Marcus. I didn't ask you to drop out and embarrass the family. But now that you've made something of yourself, it's time to remember where you came from, where I came from." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I remembered exactly where I came from, a family that had written me off the moment I chose a different path. I thought back to that day 27 years ago when I walked away from Harvard in my junior year. Claire had been there, home for Christmas break from her pre-med program at Johns Hopkins. "You're throwing your life away," she'd said, standing in our parents' living room while I packed my single suitcase. "Mom and Dad have sacrificed everything for your education, and this is how you repay them." Our father had been too angry to speak. Our mother had cried, but Claire had looked at me with such disappointment, such disgust, that it still stung. Decades later, she'd called me selfish, irresponsible, a dreamer who would amount to nothing, and now she sat in my corner office, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built, demanding her share of dreams she'd once mocked. "I remember exactly where I came from," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I came from a family that believed I'd fail, a family that cut me off financially and emotionally when I needed support most, a family that celebrated your medical degree, while ignoring my first successful exit." Claire's facade slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something desperate in her eyes. "That's ancient history, Marcus. We're older now, wiser, and family takes care of family." But as I looked at her, I noticed things I'd missed before. The designer handbag that couldn't quite hide the worry lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, the forced confidence that felt like armor. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I intended to find out what. After Claire left my office that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in an alternate reality. I sat alone in the silence, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting, trying to process what had just happened. The audacity of her demand was breathtaking, but what disturbed me more was how naturally she'd delivered it, as if she genuinely believed she was entitled to half of everything I'd built. That evening, I found myself pulling out old photo albums, something I hadn't done in years. There it was, the picture I'd been thinking about, Claire's medical school graduation. I was 25 then, just starting my second company after the spectacular failure of my first. I remembered that day vividly because it perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with our family dynamic. Our parents had flown to Baltimore for Claire's graduation ceremony. They'd rented a hotel suite, thrown a celebration dinner, invited all the extended family. Claire had looked radiant in her cap and gown. Our father's chest puffed out with pride as he introduced her to everyone as Dr. Blackwell. I'd driven down from Boston, where I was living in a studio apartment and surviving on credit cards and determination. I'd brought a small gift, a leather portfolio, engraved with her initials, something I'd saved for months to afford. When I arrived at the restaurant, the hostess directed me to a table in the back corner, clearly an afterthought addition. "Marcus made it," our mother had announced with forced enthusiasm, as if my presence was a pleasant surprise rather than expected. The conversation continued around me, focused entirely on Claire's achievements, her residency prospects, her bright future in cardiology. I'd sat there, invisible, listening to toast after toast, celebrating the golden child while my own struggles were never acknowledged. No one asked about my business, my dreams, or how I was managing after my startup's collapse. I was the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the one who'd thrown away his Harvard education for foolish dreams. But what hurt most wasn't the neglected, was Claire's participation in it. She'd basked in the attention, never once trying to include me in the conversation or acknowledge my presence. When someone asked about her brother at Harvard, she'd quickly corrected them. "Oh, Marcus dropped out. He's trying to start some kind of computer business." The dismissive way she'd said computer business still echoed in my memory, as if my passion for technology was a childhood phase I'd eventually outgrow. That night, I'd driven back to Boston in silence, promising myself that someday I'd prove them all wrong. Someday they'd see what I was capable of. Someday they'd regret dismissing me so icily. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I had proven them wrong. My computer business was worth $50 million. I employed over 200 people. I'd been featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at conferences. I'd achieved everything I'd dreamed of and more, but instead of acknowledgement or apology, I got a demand. Instead of pride or support, I got entitlement. Claire didn't want to celebrate my success, she wanted to claim it as her own. As I closed the photo album, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. In all those years of struggle, in all those moments when I could have used family support, Claire had been absent. But now that there was money involved, she'd suddenly remembered we were siblings. The pattern was becoming clear, and I didn't like what it revealed about the people I'd called family. Asterisk. The memories of those early years came flooding back with painful clarity. After leaving Harvard, I'd moved to Boston with nothing but a backpack, a laptop, and an unshakable belief that I could build something meaningful. The family had made their position clear. If I wanted to throw my life away, I'd do it without their support. I rented a room in a shared apartment in Somerville for $400 a month, money I'd saved from a summer internship. My roommates were musicians and artists, people who understood the struggle of chasing dreams that others considered foolish. They never questioned why a former Harvard student was eating generic cereal for dinner, or why I spent 18 hours a day hunched over my computer. My first startup was a disaster, though I didn't see it coming at the time. I'd developed what I thought was revolutionary software for small businesses, a customer management system that could streamline operations and boost efficiency. I was so proud of that code, so certain it would change everything. I remember the day I called home to tell them about my first potential investor meeting. I was nervous, excited, desperate for some family encouragement. My mother answered the phone. "Marcus, honey, when are you coming to your senses?" she'd asked before I could even explain why I was calling. "Claire's doing her residency at Johns Hopkins. She's going to be a cardiologist. She's making something of herself. Mom, I have an investor meeting tomorrow. This could be sweetie. These fantasies need to stop. You could still go back to school, finish your degree. It's not too late to salvage your education." I'd hung up without telling her about the meeting. The next day I pitched my heart out to 3 venture capitalists in a downtown office. They listened politely, asked probing questions, and ultimately passed. The feedback was brutal but honest. The market wasn't ready, the technology wasn't differentiated enough, and I lacked the business experience to execute effectively. That rejection led to 8 more rejections over 6 months. My savings dwindled, my credit cards maxed out. I took a job at a tech support company, answering phones for $12 an hour, just to pay rent and keep the lights on. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle, it was the isolation. My Harvard friends had moved on to investment banking and consulting jobs. My family treated my situation as proof they'd been right all along. I had no one to talk to about the crushing weight of failure, no one who understood why I couldn't just give up and get a real job. I spent my evenings and weekends coding new projects, learning from my mistakes, studying the market with obsessive intensity. I lived on rice and beans, walked everywhere to save money, and taught myself business fundamentals through library books and online courses. The lowest point came 18 months after leaving Harvard. I was working at the tech support job during the day and driving for a food delivery service at night. One evening, I delivered Chinese food to a party in Cambridge, celebration for someone's promotion at a consulting firm. As I handed over the bags of food, I recognized the voice inside. Marcus Blackwell. Asterisk, it was David Chen, my former study partner from Harvard. He appeared at the door in an expensive suit, holding a glass of wine, clearly successful and confident. "Hey David," I managed, holding the delivery bags awkwardly. Asterisk, the confusion on his face was painful to watch. "Are you delivering food?" "Just temporarily," I lied. "Between projects?" He invited me in, probably out of pity, and I found myself surrounded by my former classmates. They were polite but clearly uncomfortable, unsure how to treat the Harvard dropout who was serving their dinner. I left quickly, but not before overhearing someone whisper, "Can you believe he threw away his Harvard degree for this?" That night, I sat in my car outside that party and cried for the first time since leaving school. Not from self-pity, but from a rage so pure it felt like fuel. I was going to prove every single one of them wrong. I was going to build something so successful, so undeniable, that they'd never question my choices again. But first, I had to survive long enough to make it happen, and I had to do it completely alone, because the people who should have believed in me had already written me off as a failure. Asterisk, the breakthrough came 3 years after that humiliating night in Cambridge. I was 28, still working multiple jobs but spending every spare moment developing a new project. This time, instead of trying to revolutionize everything, I focused on solving one specific problem really well. I'd noticed that small marketing agencies were drowning in client data, emails, social media metrics, campaign results, but had no efficient way to synthesize it into actionable insights. The existing solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for small teams. So I built something elegant and affordable, a dashboard that could integrate multiple data sources and present them in clear, beautiful visualizations. I called it Data Sync, and I built it in my studio apartment over 8 months of 16-hour days. I survived on savings from my delivery job and the occasional freelance coding project. My neighbors probably thought I was having a breakdown. I barely left the apartment, ordered groceries online, and lived in a constant state of caffeinated focus. The first version was rough, but it worked. I created a simple website, wrote some basic documentation, and launched with a free trial. Then I did something I'd never done with my first startup. I talked to actual customers. I called marketing agencies directly, offered free consultations, and listened to their problems. I learned that my initial assumptions were only partially correct. They needed the dashboard, yes, but they also needed it to integrate with tools I'd never heard of. They wanted features I hadn't considered. Most importantly, they were willing to pay for something that genuinely made their lives easier. I spent the next 6 months iterating based on customer feedback. Each conversation taught me something new. Each feature request helped me understand the market better. Unlike my first startup, where I'd built in isolation and hoped for the best, this time I was building with intention and purpose. The moment everything changed was a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up to find 17 new scenes than I'd seen in any single day. Then my phone rang. "Is this Marcus Blackwell from Data Sync?" The voice was crisp, professional, confident. "Yes, this is Marcus. This is Janet Morrison from Morrison & Associates. We're a marketing agency in Chicago, and we've been using your trial for 2 weeks. We'd like to discuss an enterprise license for our team." My hands started shaking. Morrison & Associates was a major player. I'd seen their work for national brands. This wasn't just another small agency. This was validation that my product could compete at a higher level. "I'd be happy to discuss that," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excellent. We're looking at a yearly contract for 50 users. What would that cost?" I did the math quickly in my head. 50 users at my standard rate would be $60,000 annually. It was more money than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined. $60,000 for the year, I said, holding my breath. "That works for us. When can we get started?" I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in my laptop screen. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was going to make it. That contract led to 3 more within a month. Word was spreading through the marketing community. Data Sync was solving real problems for real people, and they were willing to pay for the solution. I quit my delivery job, then my tech support job. For the first time since leaving Harvard, I was working on my business full-time. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was finally achieving success, my family remained conspicuously absent. I'd sent updates to my parents about Data Sync's progress, hoping for some acknowledgement or encouragement. The responses were polite but distant. "That's nice, dear," or "Hope it works out this time." Claire never responded to my updates at all. She was busy with her cardiology residency, building her own career in medicine, a career that everyone in the family celebrated and supported. My success was treated as a pleasant surprise, something that might finally make me respectable, rather than the culmination of years of sacrifice and determination. But I didn't have time to dwell on family dynamics. Data Sync was growing faster than I could handle alone. I hired my first employee, a brilliant developer named Sarah, who believed in the vision, then a salesperson, then a customer support specialist. We moved from my apartment to a small office space in Cambridge. By the end of that first successful year, Data Sync had 43 clients and was generating over $2 million in annual revenue. I was finally able to pay myself a real salary, move to a proper apartment, and start building the life I'd imagined years earlier. The family's attitude began to shift subtly. Suddenly, my mother would mention my business to her friends. My father started asking more detailed questions about my work. Claire even called once to congratulate me on a magazine article that mentioned Data Sync as an emerging player in the marketing technology space, but their interest felt hollow, transactional. They were proud of my success in the abstract, but had no real understanding of what it had cost me to achieve it. They'd been absent during the struggle and only appeared when there was something worth celebrating. I should have recognized the pattern then. I should have understood that their renewed attention was conditional, dependent on my ability to reflect well on the family name. But I was too grateful for any acknowledgement, too hungry for their approval after years of dismissal. That gratitude would come back to haunt me in ways I never could have imagined. **** Success, I discovered, was lonelier than failure. When I was struggling, I had the companionship of other dreamers, other people grinding toward something better. But as data sync grew and my bank account expanded, I found myself increasingly isolated from the people who'd understood my journey. My 40th birthday was a perfect example. I'd hoped it might be a turning point, a moment when my family would finally acknowledge what I'd built. I booked a private dining room at one of Boston's best restaurants and sent invitations to everyone who mattered to me. My parents, Claire, a few close friends, my key employees who'd become like family. I'd even had my assistant call Claire's office to confirm the date worked with her schedule. She was finishing her cardiology fellowship and had just accepted a position at a prestigious hospital in Philadelphia. Our mother couldn't stop talking about how proud she was of Dr. Blackwell. The dinner was supposed to start at 7. By 7:30, I was sitting at a table set for 12 with only 6 people present: my employees and 2 college friends who'd stayed in touch over the years. My parents had sent regrets that morning. My father had a golf tournament. My mother was visiting her sister. Standard excuses that I'd heard countless times before, but Claire's absence cut deeper. No call, no text, no explanation. Just an empty chair at the head of the table where I'd hoped my sister would sit. I spent the evening pretending everything was fine, making jokes about family priorities, while my employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Later that night, I called Claire's apartment. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Oh, Marcus, hi. How was your dinner? You missed it," I said simply. "Missed what? Oh God, was that tonight? I'm so sorry. I had this case at the hospital. A patient came in with chest pains, and I couldn't leave. You know how it is." But I could hear music in the background, the sound of laughter and conversation. She wasn't at the hospital. She was at a party. My sister had chosen someone else's celebration over mine, then lied about it when confronted. "It's fine," I lied back. "Maybe next year." "Definitely, and Marcus. Happy birthday, 40s. A big one." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, a beautiful 2-bedroom and back bay with views of the Charles River, and felt the weight of my success. I had everything I'd thought I wanted: financial security, professional recognition, a growing company that was changing how businesses understood their customers. But the people I'd most wanted to share it with remained stubbornly absent. The pattern continued for years. Each milestone: A Sync's first $5 million in revenue, my acquisition of a competitor. The launch of our enterprise platform was celebrated by my team and acknowledged politely by my family. They'd send cards or make brief phone calls, but their interest felt performative, like they were checking a box rather than genuinely engaging with my life. Meanwhile, Claire's achievements were family-wide celebrations. When she published her first research paper, our parents hosted a dinner party. When she got engaged to Robert, a fellow cardiologist from a prominent family, they threw an elaborate engagement party. When she bought her first house, a modest 3-bedroom in a Philadelphia suburb, our mother couldn't stop talking about how proud she was of Claire's success. The irony was overwhelming. My modest apartment cost more than Claire's house. My annual income dwarfed hers by orders of magnitude. But in our family's eyes, she remained the success story, while I was still the question mark. The one who'd taken an unconventional path that might work out in the end. I tried to bridge the gap multiple times. I sent thoughtful gifts for holidays and birthdays, things I'd carefully chosen based on conversations about their interests. I invited them to company events, hoping they'd see what I'd built and understand its significance. I even offered to pay for family vacations, thinking shared experiences might rebuild our connections. But every gesture felt like it landed in a void. The gifts were acknowledged with perfunctory thank you notes. The invitations were declined due to scheduling conflicts. The vacation offers were dismissed as too generous or unnecessary. The most painful rejection came when I offered to pay off my parents' mortgage for their 40th wedding anniversary. They were in their 70s, living on Social Security and my father's modest pension. The mortgage payment was straining their budget, forcing them to make choices between medications and groceries. "We don't need charity," my father had said when I made the offer. "We've managed fine our whole lives without handouts." But 6 months later, when Claire offered to help with some medical bills, they accepted gratefully. The difference, I realized, wasn't the money, it was the messenger. Help from the golden child was generous and loving. Help from the family disappointment was condescending charity. I stopped trying so hard after that. I sent the requisite holiday cards, made the expected phone calls, but I stopped investing emotional energy in relationships that seemed fundamentally what my chosen family, my employees, my close friends, the entrepreneurs I'd met along the way became my real support system. But the wound remained. Even as my net worth climbed toward 50 million, even as business magazines wrote profiles about my success, I carried the weight of family indifference. I'd proven them wrong about my potential, but I'd never won their respect or genuine interest. That empty chair at my 40th birthday dinner became a metaphor for everything missing from my success. I had the money, the recognition, the professional achievement, but I was still sitting alone at a table set for 12, wondering why the people who should have been proudest of me remained the most distant. 3 days after Claire's shocking demand, I was still reeling, but something about her confidence, The way she'd delivered her ultimatum with such certainty nagged at me. This wasn't a spontaneous request born of desperation, it felt rehearsed, planned, calculated. I decided to do some investigating of my own. If Claire thought she could manipulate me with family guilt, she clearly didn't understand how thoroughly my business success had been built on data, research, and strategic thinking. I didn't make $50 million decisions based on emotion, and I wasn't about to start now. My first call was to my security team. Data Sync had grown large enough to warrant corporate security measures, including background checks on key personnel and threat assessments. I'd never thought I'd need to investigate my own family, but desperate times called for uncomfortable measures. I need you to run a comprehensive background check, I told Marcus Rivera, our head of security and a former FBI agent. Financial records, property ownership, recent major purchases, everything you can find legally, business or personal, he asked without judgment. Marcus had worked enough corporate investigations to know that threats often came from unexpected places. Personal, it's my sister. Within 24 hours, Marcus had compiled a dossier that painted a very different picture of Claire's life than the one she'd presented to our family. The woman who'd demanded half my fortune as if it were her birthright was drowning in debt. Her mortgage payments on that modest Philadelphia house were 3 months behind. She owed over $40,000 on credit cards, with minimum payments that consumed nearly a quarter of her take-home pay from the hospital. Her car, a BMW she'd bought new 2 years ago, was financed at an interest rate that suggested damaged credit, but the most revealing discovery was a series of investment losses that painted a picture of someone making increasingly desperate financial decisions. Claire had lost nearly $70,000 in cryptocurrency investments over the past year, chasing get-rich-quick schemes that promised massive returns. She'd borrowed against her 401k twice, depleting her retirement savings. There were records of small personal loans from online lenders, the kind with predatory interest rates that trapped borrowers in cycles of debt. The timeline was particularly interesting. Claire's financial troubles had accelerated over the past 18 months, coinciding with her engagement to Robert. I'd met Robert once at a family gathering, a pompous cardiologist who name-dropped expensive restaurants and vacation destinations with the frequency of someone trying very hard to project success. A deeper dive into Robert's background revealed why he was carrying even more debt than Claire: medical school loans, a failed investment in a medical practice, and a lifestyle that far exceeded his income. They were two people pretending to be wealthy while drowning in the expenses of maintaining that illusion. The most damning discovery was a folder on Claire's computer, obtained through perfectly legal means involving public records and social media analysis that contained detailed research about my business and assets. She'd been tracking DataSync's valuation, researching my real estate holdings, even calculating the potential value of my stock options and investment portfolio. This wasn't a sister asking for help in a moment of desperation. This was a calculated assessment of my worth, followed by a strategic demand for half of everything I'd earned. She'd studied my finances the way a hostile takeover specialist studies a target company. The research went back months. Screenshots of business articles mentioning my net worth, property records from my recent home purchase, even analysis of my social media posts, looking for clues about my lifestyle and spending habits. Claire had been planning this approach for at least 6 months, maybe longer. What struck me most was the clinical detachment of it all. These weren't the desperate notes of someone asking family for help. They were the strategic plans of someone executing a carefully considered extraction scheme. She'd researched exactly how much I was worth, calculated what half would mean for her financial situation, and then crafted the perfect emotional appeal: family, loyalty, and shared obligation. The family shares everything philosophy she'd presented so earnestly was nothing more than a manipulation tactic designed to make me feel guilty for succeeding while she struggled. She'd counted on my good nature, my desire to be the bigger person, my lingering need for family approval, but the most infuriating part was how she'd positioned herself as the reasonable one. In her mind, I was the selfish brother hoarding wealth, while his sister suffered. She'd convinced herself that her financial irresponsibility and poor decisions entitled her to the fruits of my decades of disciplined work and careful planning. I found myself wondering if she'd shared this plan with our parents, if they were complicit in this calculated approach to my success. The thought made my stomach turn. Had the family's sudden interest in my achievements over the past few years been genuine, or had they been assessing my value for future extraction? That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the evidence of Claire's deception. Financial desperation could make people do terrible things, but this level of calculation and manipulation suggested something deeper. This wasn't just about money, it was about entitlement. About a worldview that saw my success as somehow belonging to her. I thought about the little girl who used to share her Halloween candy with me, and I mourned her loss. That Claire had been replaced by someone who could research my assets for months while pretending to care about family relationships. Someone who could look me in the eye and demand half my life's work while hiding the extent of her own financial recklessness. The question now wasn't whether to give her money, that was absolutely off the table. The question was how to protect myself from someone who'd already demonstrated she was willing to use family relationships as weapons in pursuit of financial gain, because if Claire was capable of this level of deception and manipulation, there was no telling what she might do next. The phone calls started 2 days after I'd told Claire I needed time to think about her request. I should have known she wouldn't wait patiently for my answer. Instead, she'd activated the family guilt machine with surgical precision. My mother called first, her voice heavy with the particular brand of disappointment she'd perfected over decades of family management. Marcus, honey, Claire told me about your conversation. I think there might be some misunderstanding. I was in my car driving home from the office, and I pulled over to give this conversation my full attention. What kind of misunderstanding, Mom? Well, she said you seemed upset when she asked for help. You know your sister's going through a difficult time right now. The wedding expenses, Robert's practice getting established, it's been stressful for them. The way she framed it was masterful. Claire hadn't demanded half my fortune. She'd asked for help. I hadn't been shocked by her audacity. I'd been upset. And somehow, Claire's financial irresponsibility had become a difficult time that warranted family intervention. Mom, Claire didn't ask for help with wedding expenses. She demanded $25 million because, and I quote, family shares everything. A pause. Well, she might have been dramatic in how she expressed it, but the sentiment is right, isn't it? We are family. When one of us is successful, we help the others. Where was this philosophy when I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping on office floors? When I was driving delivery food to pay rent? When I begged you and Dad for just emotional support? Never mind financial help? Oh, Marcus. Her voice took on that martyred tone I remembered from childhood. You chose that path. We told you dropping out of Harvard was a mistake, but you insisted you knew better. Claire chose the responsible route: medical school, residency, building a stable career. She deserves support. The logic was staggering in its circular nature. My success was mine alone because I had chosen a risky path. But now that I'd succeeded, that success somehow belonged to the family member who'd chosen the responsible route. Claire deserved support for making good decisions, while my bad decisions, ones that led to massive success, disqualified me from family consideration. So when I was failing, it was my fault, and I deserved no help. Now that I'm successful, it's my obligation to share that success with someone who's made irresponsible financial decisions. Marcus, that's not she's your sister. She's always been proud of you. That was an outright lie, and we both knew it. Claire had never been proud of me. She'd been embarrassed by my choices, dismissive of my dreams, and absent during my struggles. Her pride was a recent invention, coinciding suspiciously with my financial success. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother deploying every guilt tactic in her considerable arsenal. I was being selfish. I was forgetting my roots. I was hurting Claire's feelings by making her feel like a beggar. I was destroying family harmony over money. The call ended with my mother's final weapon, the silent treatment threat. I just hope you'll think about what kind of man you want to be, Marcus. Your father and I raised you to care about family, but maybe success has changed you more than we realized. 3 hours later, my father called. His approach was different, but equally manipulative, the disappointed patriarch routine. Son, I heard about your conversation with Claire. I'm hoping we can talk man to man about this situation. What situation is that, Dad? Your sister needs help, and you have the means to provide it. Seems pretty straightforward to me. She needs help because she's made terrible financial decisions. Should I enable that behavior by giving her millions of dollars? Marcus, I've been supporting this family for 45 years. Sometimes you help people even when they've made mistakes. That's what family does. The irony was breathtaking. This man had refused to help me when I was struggling to build something meaningful, when a few $1,000s could have made the difference between success and failure. But now he was lecturing me about family obligation because his golden child wanted millions. Where was that philosophy when I needed help starting my business? That was different. You were chasing pipe dreams against our advice. Claire's a doctor, a respected professional who's hit a rough patch. A rough patch caused by buying a BMW she couldn't afford, investing in cryptocurrency schemes, and financing a lifestyle that exceeded her income. How do you know about? He caught himself, but the damage was done. Claire had shared details about her finances with our parents, probably painting herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own financial destruction. The conversation followed the same pattern as my mother's call. I was successful, therefore I owed the family. Claire was struggling, therefore she deserved help. My past difficulties were self-inflicted and irrelevant. Her current difficulties were temporary and worthy of sympathy. But the most revealing moment came near the end of the call. Marcus, your mother and I aren't getting any younger. We'd hate for family disagreements to complicate our relationships with our children. It was a threat, barely disguised. Support Claire's demand, or risk being cut off from the family entirely. The same family that had already cut me off emotionally years ago, but somehow I was still supposed to fear losing their conditional love. After my father hung up, I sat in my car and laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound that echoed in the empty garage. The same parents who dismissed my dreams as foolish were now demanding I bankroll their daughter's irresponsibility. The same family that had treated my success as a pleasant surprise was now treating it as a family asset to be redistributed. But the calls weren't finished. Over the next week, I heard from my Aunt Margaret, my cousin David, and even my grandmother, all with variations of the same message. Claire was family. Family helped each other. I was successful and should be generous. Money wasn't everything, but coordination was obvious. Claire hadn't just researched my finances, she'd orchestrated a comprehensive pressure campaign designed to make me feel isolated and selfish for refusing her demand. Every family member had been briefed on their role in this emotional manipulation. The most painful call came from my grandmother, the one person in the family whose opinion I'd always respected. "Marcus dear, I'm worried about you. Your mother says you're being stubborn about helping Claire. That doesn't sound like the grandson I know." "Grandma, did anyone tell you exactly what Claire asked for? She needs some financial help, doesn't she? You've been so blessed, Marcus. Surely you can spare something for your sister." They'd all been told the sanitized version. Claire needed help, not that she'd demanded half my net worth. They'd been mobilized based on incomplete information, turned into weapons in Claire's campaign to extract my wealth. Grandma Claire demanded $25 million, not help with a medical bill or wedding expenses, half of everything I've earned. A long silence. "That can't be right, dear. That's quite a lot of money." "It is." And when I told her I needed time to think about it, she sent the whole family to pressure me into agreeing. After I explained the full situation, my grandmother's tone changed completely. She understood the difference between helping family in crisis and enabling someone's irresponsible behavior, but the damage was done. Claire had successfully weaponized family relationships in service of her financial desperation. That night, I realized I was facing something far more dangerous than a greedy sister. I was dealing with someone willing to manipulate every family relationship in pursuit of my money. Someone who'd turned my parents, grandparents, and extended family into unwitting participants in an emotional extortion scheme. The question was no longer whether I'd give Claire money. The question was how many family relationships would be destroyed by her campaign to extract it. Asterisk. The family pressure campaign was reaching a crescendo, and I knew I needed professional guidance. The situation had moved beyond family drama into something that could potentially threaten my business and personal assets. It was time to consult with lawyers who understood both family law and asset protection. My attorney, Catherine Walsh, had been with me since DataSync's early days. She'd structured the company, handled our acquisitions, and protected my interests through every stage of growth. She was brilliant, pragmatic, and had zero tolerance for emotional manipulation disguised as legal claims. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Catherine said, reviewing my notes from our emergency meeting. "Your sister has demanded 50% of your personal net worth based solely on family relationship, with no legal documentation, no investment in your business, and no contribution to your success." "That's correct. And when you didn't immediately agree, she enlisted your entire family to pressure you into compliance." "Also correct." Catherine leaned back in her chair and laughed, not with humor, but with the incredulity of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human greed and manipulation. "Marcus, I've been practicing law for 23 years. I've handled hostile takeovers, inheritance disputes, and partnership dissolutions that got truly ugly. But this is remarkable in its audacity and legal emptiness." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Let's be absolutely clear about your sister's legal position. She has none. She's not a business partner, not an investor, not a spouse with community property rights. She has no claim to your personal assets, your business interests, or your intellectual property. Her demand has exactly the same legal weight as if a stranger walked into your office and demanded half your money." The relief I felt was immediate. An overwhelming part of me had been worried that there was some legal principle I'd overlooked, some family obligation that could be enforced through the courts. However, Catherine continued, "The lack of legal merit doesn't mean she can't cause problems. She could file nuisance lawsuits designed to harass you and cost you money to defend. She could make public statements that damage your reputation or your business relationships. She could escalate the family pressure campaign to include public shaming or social media attacks." She was right, and I'd already started seeing signs of escalation. Claire had begun making subtle comments on social media about family loyalty and forgetting where you came from, nothing direct enough to be clearly about me, but obvious enough that anyone following both our accounts would understand the subtext. "What are my options for protection?" I asked. Catherine outlined a comprehensive strategy. "First, we'd document everything, every conversation, every demand, every pressure tactic employed by Claire or other family members. This would establish a pattern of harassment if legal action became necessary. Second, we'd send a formal cease and desist letter, making it clear that any further demands for money would be considered harassment. This would create a legal record and potentially deter escalation. Third, We'd review my asset protection strategies to ensure everything was properly shielded from potential claims. My business interests were already well protected through corporate structures, but we needed to examine my personal assets. The good news, Catherine said, is that you've been smart about asset protection from the beginning. Your business interests are held through properly structured entities. Your real estate is owned through LLCs, your investment accounts are diversified and protected. Even if she did try to pursue some kind of claim which would be frivolous, there's not much she could touch. But Catherine's next point was sobering. The bad news is that defending against even frivolous claims takes time, money, and emotional energy, and family legal disputes get ugly in ways that business disputes don't. Are you prepared for this to potentially destroy your relationship with your entire family? I thought about the phone calls from my parents, the disappointment in my grandmother's voice, the coordinated pressure campaign that had already poisoned family gatherings for the foreseeable future. Catherine, I think those relationships were already destroyed the moment Claire decided my success belonged to her. I'm just now seeing it clearly. She nodded with the understanding of someone who'd watched families implode over money countless times. Money doesn't create character flaws, Marcus, it reveals them. Your sister's entitlement, and your family's willingness to enable it existed long before you became wealthy. Over the next hour, we developed a comprehensive plan. Catherine would draft a letter to Claire, formally declining her demand and requesting that all further communication go through attorneys. We'd also prepare a letter to my parents, explaining the legal realities and asking them to cease their pressure campaign. I want to be clear about something, Catherine said as our meeting concluded. Your sister's behavior suggests someone who's desperate and potentially irrational. Desperate people sometimes escalate in unpredictable ways. We should be prepared for her to try more aggressive tactics, such as public accusations, attempts to damage your business relationships, possibly even false claims of abuse or exploitation. I've seen family disputes where one party tries to weaponize the court system through restraining orders, harassment claims, or business interference lawsuits. The thought was chilling but not entirely surprising. Someone who could research my assets for months while pretending to care about family relationships was capable of almost anything. Catherine's final recommendation was the most difficult to accept. Complete communication cut off with Claire and any family members who continued to pressure me on her behalf. I know it sounds harsh, but you need to understand that every conversation is potentially being recorded or documented for future use against you. Every expression of sympathy could be twisted into an admission of obligation. Every offer of limited help could be used as evidence that you acknowledge her claim. As I left Catherine's office, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I was legally protected and had a clear plan for moving forward. Sadness that it had come to this, that family relationships I'd treasured, however imperfect, were now potential threats requiring legal protection. But I also felt something else. Clarity. For years, I'd carried guilt about my family's distance, wondering if my success had somehow made me arrogant or disconnected. Now I understood that the problem wasn't my success. It was their expectation that my success should belong to them. The little girl who used to share Halloween candy with me was gone, replaced by someone who saw my achievements as her entitlement, and that was a loss worth grieving, but not a situation worth enabling. The legal consultation had given me more than asset protection advice. It had given me permission to stop carrying responsibility for relationships that had become fundamentally transactional. The cease and desist letter Catherine sent to Claire had the opposite effect of what we'd hoped. Instead of backing down, she escalated dramatically. Within 48 hours, my phone was buzzing constantly with texts, calls, and social media notifications that painted a picture of a family in crisis, with me cast as the villain. The first sign that things were spiraling came in a group text to our extended family. Claire had created a chat called Family Emergency and included aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I need everyone to know what's happening, her message began. Marcus has decided that his money is more important than family. I asked for help during the most difficult time of my life, and he responded with legal threats. I'm heartbroken that my own brother would choose lawyers over love. The responses came flooding in, and I watched in real time as Claire's narrative took hold. People who didn't know the details of her demand, but understood the broad strokes. Asks brother for help. Brother refuses and threatens legal action, naturally sided with her. I was painted as the wealthy, heartless sibling who'd forgotten his roots. Marcus, this is so unlike you, wrote my Aunt Sarah. Claire is family. Can't you work this out without lawyers? Money changes people, added my cousin Mike. Remember when we were kids and you would have shared anything with us? I'm disappointed, Marcus, came from my Uncle Tom. Your parents raised you better than this. Each message felt like a knife twist. These weren't strangers making judgments based on incomplete information. These were people who'd watched me grow up, who'd celebrated my early successes, who should have known my character well enough to question Claire's narrative. But Claire wasn't finished. The group text was just the opening salvo in a comprehensive reputation destruction. campaign that demonstrated the same methodical planning she'd used. To research my finances. Next came the social media posts. Nothing direct enough to be clearly defamatory, but a steady stream of content designed to paint her as the victim of family betrayal. Photos of us as children, with captions like "when family meant everything." Posts about the importance of helping loved ones in crisis, quotes about greed and forgetting one's roots. The most devastating post was a photo from my medical school graduation, one I'd completely forgotten existed. It showed me in the background, clapping as Claire received her diploma, with a caption that read, "My brother was there for my biggest moments." I thought family worked both ways. The implication was clear. I'd supported her success, but was now refusing to let her share in mine. The post received hundreds of likes and dozens of supportive comments from people who knew nothing about the actual situation, but Claire's masterstroke was involving our parents' financial situation. 3 days after the cease and desist letter, my mother called in tears. "Marcus, your father had a heart episode yesterday. We're at the hospital, and I don't know how we're going to pay for all these tests and treatments." Claire offered to help, but with everything that's happening between you two, the manipulation was transparent but effective. Claire had found a way to connect my refusal to give her money with my parents' medical crisis. The subtext was obvious. If I'd been more generous with my sister, she'd be in a position to help with Dad's medical bills. "Mom, how much are the medical expenses? I'll take care of them directly." That's not the point, Marcus. The point is that family should be able to count on each other. Claire shouldn't have to choose between helping us and dealing with your legal threats. Even offering to solve the immediate problem wasn't enough. The narrative had been established. I was the family villain who valued money over relationships. The campaign reached its peak during what should have been a routine family gathering, my cousin Lisa's wedding. I'd RSVP'd months earlier, before any of this drama started, and decided not to let Claire's manipulation keep me away from celebrating with family. That decision proved to be a mistake. The moment I arrived at the reception, I could feel the change in atmosphere. Conversations stopped when I approached relatives who'd normally greet me warmly, offered polite but distant acknowledgments. I was seated at a table in the back corner, far from the family tables where I'd normally be placed. Claire, meanwhile, was holding court at the main family table, surrounded by sympathetic relatives offering support for her difficult situation. She looked beautiful in her bridesmaid dress, playing the role of brave sister, persevering despite family betrayal. The confrontation came during the speeches. Lisa's father, my Uncle Robert, gave a heartfelt toast about the importance of family, loyalty, and supporting each other through difficult times. As he spoke, I noticed several relatives glancing in my direction with expressions of disappointment and judgment. But the real blow came when Claire was invited to give a speech as maid of honor. She spoke beautifully about love, commitment, and the bonds that hold families together even during challenging times. Then, near the end, she looked directly at me. "Sometimes the people closest to us forget what really matters," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But I believe that love conquers all, even when money and lawyers get involved. Family is forever." The applause was thunderous. Several people wiped away tears, and I sat there, publicly shamed at my own cousin's wedding, watching Claire receive a standing ovation for her performance as the wounded but forgiving sister. After the speech, I was approached by a steady stream of relatives offering gentle but firm advice about the importance of family reconciliation. Everyone had an opinion about my situation, despite knowing only Claire's version of events. "She's your sister, Marcus," said my Aunt Margaret. "Whatever happened between you, surely it's not worth destroying your relationship over." "Money isn't everything," added my cousin David. "You've been blessed with success. Sharing that blessing with family is what good people do." "I remember when you two were inseparable," said my grandmother's sister, Rose. "Claire talks about you constantly. She's so proud of your success, and so hurt that you won't let her be part of it." Each conversation was a masterclass in emotional manipulation by proxy. Claire had positioned herself as the sister who wanted to share in my success, not someone demanding half my net worth. She was hurt by my rejection, not angry about my refusal to enable her financial irresponsibility. By the end of the evening, I was emotionally exhausted and socially isolated within my own family. Claire had successfully rewritten the narrative of our conflict, casting herself as the victim and me as the villain. She'd weaponized family relationships, social pressure, and public shame in service of her financial goals. As I drove home from the wedding, I realized I was dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple greed. Claire had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign designed to isolate me from family support while building sympathy for her position. She'd turned every family relationship into a pressure point, every social gathering into an opportunity for public judgment. The little girl who used to share Halloween candy with me had become someone capable of psychological warfare, and she was winning. The wedding humiliation was a turning point. I'd tried to take the high road, to preserve family relationships despite Claire's manipulation, but her public shaming campaign had crossed a line. If she wanted to play psychological warfare, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I hadn't built a $50 million empire by being passive in the face of strategic attacks. The next morning, I called Marcus Rivera back into my office. I need you to dig deeper into my sister's situation. Legal financial records only, but I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with. How deep? Marcus asked, his expression serious. Deep enough to understand her true motivations and capabilities. This isn't just about money anymore. She's actively trying to destroy my reputation and family relationships. I need to know what's driving that level of desperation. What Marcus uncovered over the next week painted a picture that was far worse than I'd imagined. Claire wasn't just financially irresponsible, she was trapped in a spiral of increasingly destructive decisions that threatened to destroy her entire life. The cryptocurrency losses I'd discovered earlier were just the beginning. Claire had borrowed money from colleagues, taken cash advances on multiple credit cards, and even used medical conference travel funds for personal expenses. She was juggling payments like someone running a Ponzi scheme, using new debt to service old debt in an unsustainable cycle. But the most shocking discovery was her gambling problem. Online casino records showed nearly $200,000 in losses over 18 months. She'd started with small bets, probably as stress relief from her demanding medical career, but had escalated to high-stakes games that consumed entire paychecks. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Chase losses with bigger bets, win occasionally to reinforce the addiction, lose progressively larger amounts, borrow money to continue playing. The medical professional who'd built her identity around careful, evidence-based decision-making had become someone making increasingly irrational financial choices. Robert's financial situation was even worse than I'd initially discovered. His failed investment in a medical practice had cost him nearly $300,000. He'd partnered with a cardiologist who'd been skimming insurance payments, leaving Robert liable for debts he didn't know existed. The legal fees alone had bankrupted him. Together, Claire and Robert owed over $700,000 more than most people's net worth, and impossible to service on their medical salaries. They were planning a wedding they couldn't afford while drowning in debt that would take decades to repay under normal circumstances. The timeline made Claire's desperation even clearer. Her demand for half my fortune hadn't been a spontaneous request, it had been a carefully calculated rescue plan. $25 million would eliminate their debt, fund their wedding, and provide enough cushion to maintain the lifestyle they'd been financing through credit. But the most disturbing discovery was evidence that Claire had been researching my assets for over a year, long before her financial situation became critical. She'd been planning this approach since before her gambling losses accelerated, which meant her entitlement to my success wasn't born of desperation. It was a long-held belief that my wealth should be available to solve her problems. Marcus also uncovered Claire's social media strategy. She'd been documenting our family dynamics for months, carefully crafting a narrative of the successful but disconnected brother and the struggling sister who just wanted family closeness. Posts about childhood memories, comments about missing the old Marcus, subtle implications that my success had changed me for the worse. She'd been building her victim narrative long before making her demand, preparing the groundwork for exactly the kind of family pressure campaign I'd experienced. This wasn't reactive manipulation, it was premeditated, emotional warfare. The most chilling discovery was a series of messages between Claire and Robert discussing their Marcus strategy. They'd researched family manipulation tactics, discussed optimal timing for their approach, and even practiced the conversation Claire would have with me. "He's always been a people pleaser," one message read. "If we frame it as family obligation rather than financial need, he'll feel guilty enough to help. The key is getting the family involved." Robert had replied, "He cares too much about what they think to hold out against group pressure." They'd analyzed my personality like hostile negotiators studying a target. Every weakness had been identified and weaponized. My desire for family approval, my guilt about past family tensions, my tendency to avoid conflict, all carefully cataloged and exploited. But perhaps the most revealing discovery was Claire's research into my legal vulnerabilities. She'd consulted with an attorney about potential claims against my assets, looking for any legal avenue to force me to share my wealth. The attorney had been clear that she had no legitimate claim, but had suggested that family pressure and public shaming might be more effective than legal action. This confirmed what I'd suspected. Claire's entire approach had been professionally planned. She wasn't just a desperate sister asking for help, she was someone who'd systematically analyzed my weaknesses and developed a comprehensive strategy to extract my wealth. The financial records also revealed something that made my blood boil. While Claire had been demanding my help for her crisis, she'd been hiding assets from our parents. She'd inherited nearly $200,000 from our grandfather 5 years ago, money she'd never mentioned to the family, and certainly never shared, despite her family shares everything philosophy. She'd used part of that inheritance as a down payment on her house, invested some in the failed cryptocurrency schemes, and gambled away the rest. But the existence of that inheritance completely undermined her narrative of being the responsible child who deserved family support. Our grandfather had been a careful man who'd saved every penny of his modest pension to leave something for his grandchildren. He'd specifically mentioned in his will that he hoped the money would help us build better lives. Claire had gambled away his life savings while lecturing me about family obligations. The hypocrisy was staggering. The woman demanding half my fortune, because family shares everything, had secretly inherited money she'd never shared with anyone. The sister, positioning herself as the victim of my greed, had hidden assets while claiming financial crisis. As I reviewed Marcus's findings, I felt my anger crystallizing into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about money or family manipulation. Anymore, it was about justice. Claire had systematically deceived our entire family. While orchestrating a campaign to paint me as the villain in her self-created crisis, she'd gambled away our grandfather's legacy while demanding access to mine. She'd hidden her inheritance while claiming I owed her half of everything I'd earned. She'd manipulated our parents' emotions while concealing the true extent of her financial recklessness. The little girl who used to share Halloween candy with me was gone, replaced by someone capable of breathtaking deception and manipulation. But unlike our extended family, I now had the full picture of who Claire had become, and I was going to make sure everyone else saw it too. Asterisk, asterisk. The stress of Claire's campaign was destroying me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd built my business by staying focused under pressure, making rational decisions in chaotic situations, and maintaining perspective during but family warfare operated by different rules. And my usual coping mechanisms weren't working. I started having trouble sleeping. Every night, I'd lie awake replaying conversations, analyzing family dynamics, and strategizing responses to Claire's next move. My mind raced through scenarios. What if she escalated further? What if more family members turned against me? What if her public shaming campaign reached my business associates? The physical symptoms started small. Occasional headaches, mild stomach discomfort, a general feeling of fatigue that I attributed to working long hours. But they escalated quickly as the family pressure intensified. During a board meeting 3 weeks after the wedding incident, I found myself struggling to concentrate on quarterly projections. My CFO was presenting revenue forecasts, and I should have been engaged in asking probing questions. Instead, I was thinking about my grandmother's disappointed voice, replaying Claire's wedding speech, imagining what other family gatherings would be like now that I'd been cast as the villain. Marcus, did you have thoughts on the Q3 expansion timeline? Asked Janet, our head of operations. I realized I'd been staring at the presentation without processing any information. Sorry, could you repeat the question? It was unlike me to be unfocused during important meetings, and I could see concern in my team's faces. These people depended on my leadership, and I was letting personal drama interfere with my professional responsibilities. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine call with a potential client. Data sync was being considered for a major enterprise contract, a kind of deal that could add millions to our annual revenue and establish us in a new market segment. We're impressed with your technical capabilities, the client's CTO was saying, but we've heard some concerning rumors about family issues affecting your company's stability. My blood went cold. I'm sorry. What kind of rumors? Nothing specific, just industry chatter about personal problems. We need to be sure our vendor relationships are stable long-term. Claire's campaign had somehow reached my professional network. Someone had connected her social media narrative to my business identity. And now potential clients were questioning data sync stability based on family drama they didn't understand. I managed to salvage the call by addressing their concerns directly and providing additional references, but the damage was clear. Claire's manipulation wasn't just destroying family relationships, it was threatening the business I'd spent decades building. That night, I was working late in my home office when the chest pain started. Sharp, stabbing sensations that made it difficult to breathe. My left arm felt heavy, and I was sweating despite the air conditioning. The rational part of my mind knew these were classic heart attack symptoms, but I told myself it was just stress and anxiety. I tried to continue working, but the pain intensified. When I stood up to get water, the room spun around me and I had to grip my desk for support. That's when I finally admitted I needed medical attention. The emergency room was a blur of tests, monitors, and concerned medical professionals. The attending physician, Dr. Rodriguez, was thorough but gentle as she explained what they'd found. Your EKG shows some irregularities, but we don't think you've had a heart attack. Your blood work indicates severe stress and exhaustion. How long have you been experiencing these symptoms? A few weeks, I admitted. Any major stressors in your life recently? I almost laughed at the understatement. Some family issues. Dr. Rodriguez nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen stress-induced medical crises countless times. Family conflicts can be particularly damaging to our health because they trigger both emotional and physiological responses. Your body is essentially in fight-or-flight mode constantly, which isn't sustainable. She prescribed rest, stress management techniques, and a follow-up with a cardiologist. But her most important advice was psychological. Whatever family situation you're dealing with, you need to find ways to protect your mental and physical health. Sometimes that means setting boundaries that feel harsh but are necessary for survival. Lying in that hospital bed at 3 a.m, connected to monitors and 4 lines, I had a moment of absolute clarity. Claire's manipulation campaign wasn't just emotionally destructive, it was literally killing me. The stress of defending myself against false narratives, the exhaustion of family warfare, the anxiety about professional reputation damage, it was all taking a physical toll that could have long-term consequences. I thought about Dr. Rodriguez's words about boundaries. For months, I had been trying to manage Claire's behavior while preserving family relationships, attempting to find middle ground that would satisfy everyone. But there was no middle ground with someone who viewed my success as her entitlement and my refusal as betrayal. The people who truly cared about my well-being, my employees, my close friends, my chosen family, were watching me deteriorate under the weight of manipulation by people who'd never supported my dreams. I was sacrificing my health to appease family members who'd already demonstrated that their love was conditional on my willingness to be exploited. The next morning, still groggy from medications and exhaustion, I made a series of phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Catherine Walsh, my attorney. I want to take a much more aggressive approach, I told her. No more trying to preserve relationships with people who are actively trying to harm me. What did you have in mind? I want to expose exactly what Claire is doing and why. The manipulation, the hidden assets, the gambling addiction, all of it. I want our family to understand who they're really supporting. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Marcus, that's a nuclear option. Once you reveal everything, there's no going back to normal family relationships. Catherine, I'm in the hospital because of the stress from these normal family relationships. There's nothing left to preserve. My second call was to Marcus Rivera. I want you to compile a comprehensive dossier on Claire's situation, something I can share with family members who've been manipulated by her narrative, financial records, the gambling losses, the hidden inheritance, the strategic planning messages with Robert, everything. Are you sure about this approach? Marcus asked. It's going to get very ugly very quickly. It's already ugly. The difference is now I'm going to fight back instead of just defending. My final call was to my assistant Sarah, asking her to schedule a family meeting. Not a gentle conversation or gradual revelation, a formal presentation where I'd lay out the complete truth about Claire's situation and demand that the manipulation stop immediately. As I hung up from that last call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Relief. The stress that had been crushing me was lifting, replaced by the clarity that comes from finally deciding to stop being a victim. Claire had spent months systematically destroying my family relationships while positioning herself as the innocent victim. She'd manipulated our parents, enlisted extended family in her pressure campaign, and threatened my professional reputation in service of extracting money she had no right to claim. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd pushed me to the point where I had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose was far more dangerous than a desperate sister with gambling debts and delusions of entitlement. The war Claire had started was about to end, but not the way she'd planned. Recovery from my stress-induced collapse gave me time to think strategically about my next moves. I'd been reacting to Claire's manipulation instead of proactively addressing the situation that was about to change. If she wanted to wage psychological warfare, she'd discover that I had resources and capabilities she'd never considered. Marcus Rivera's investigation had revealed the surface level of Claire's deception, but I suspected there was more to uncover. The level of sophistication in her manipulation campaign suggested someone with experience in psychological manipulation tactics, either through professional training or previous practice. I want you to expand the investigation, I told Marcus. During my first day back at the office, look into Claire's history more deeply. How long has this pattern of behavior existed? Has she manipulated other people or situations before targeting me? That's going to require more intrusive methods, Marcus warned. We're moving beyond financial records into personal history. Do it legally and ethically, but be thorough. I need to understand exactly who I'm dealing with. What Marcus uncovered over the next 10 days was a pattern of manipulation that stretched back years, revealing that my current situation wasn't an aberration. It was Claire's established method of operation when facing problems she couldn't solve through conventional means. During medical school, Claire had convinced a wealthy classmate to lend her $15,000 for emergency family expenses. She'd told an elaborate story about our father needing surgery and our family lacking insurance coverage. The classmate, Sarah Chen, had been sympathetic and generous, expecting repayment within 6 months. 3 years later, Sarah was still waiting for her money. When she'd pressed Claire for repayment, Claire had accused her of trying to profit from a friend's misfortune and had enlisted mutual friends to pressure Sarah into dropping her demands. The manipulation was textbook. Reframe the victim as the aggressor. Use social pressure to isolate the target and claim moral superiority, while avoiding responsibility. The pattern repeated during Claire's residency. She'd borrowed money from colleagues, manipulated sympathetic supervisors into giving her preferential treatment, and consistently played the victim when consequences arose. A senior resident named Dr. Peterson had given her career-making research opportunities after Claire convinced him she was struggling with family financial pressures. When Peterson discovered Claire had lied about her situation, she'd accused him of professional harassment and had tried to damage his reputation, but the most revealing discovery was Claire's relationship history. She'd dated a successful investment banker named Michael Harrison for 2 years before meeting Robert. The relationship had ended abruptly when Michael discovered Claire had been using his credit cards for personal expenses while telling him she was handling their shared household bills. Michael had found out only when his credit score plummeted due to missed payments on accounts he didn't know existed. Claire had been intercepting his mail, paying minimum amounts on his cards while using the available credit for her gambling and lifestyle expenses. When confronted, she'd claimed it was a misunderstanding and had promised to fix everything immediately. Instead, she'd escalated the manipulation. She'd told mutual friends that Michael was financially controlling and emotionally abusive, that he was trying to destroy her career out of jealousy. She'd enlisted his own friends and family in a campaign to pressure him into forgiveness. Painting herself as the victim of an older man's manipulation, the tactics were identical to what she was doing to me. Extensive research into the target's vulnerabilities, careful construction of victim narratives, strategic use of social pressure, and complete reframing of her own behavior as reasonable responses to others. Unreasonable actions. Marcus had managed to contact Michael through professional networks, and his account of the relationship's end was chilling in its similarity to my current experience. She's brilliant at reading people, Michael had told Marcus. She identified exactly what I valued: family approval, professional reputation, being seen as a good person, and weaponized all of it. By the time I understood what was happening, she'd convinced half our social circle that I was the problem. Michael had eventually been forced to move to a different city and start over professionally because Claire's campaign had been so effective. His reputation in Boston financial circles had been damaged, his family relationships strained, and his mental health severely impacted. The worst part, Michael had explained, was that she genuinely seemed to believe her own narrative. It wasn't conscious manipulation. She'd convinced herself that she was the victim and I was the villain. That level of self-deception made her incredibly convincing to other people. This insight was crucial. Claire wasn't simply a greedy person making calculated decisions. She was someone whose psychological makeup allowed her to completely rewrite reality to suit her needs. She could commit terrible acts while maintaining absolute belief in her own victimhood. The investigation also revealed the full extent of Claire's current financial desperation. Beyond the gambling debts and credit card balances I'd already discovered, she owed money to loan sharks, the kind of people who didn't accept payment plans or bankruptcy declarations as solutions. Phone records showed increasingly threatening calls from numbers associated with illegal lending operations. Claire was facing physical danger if she couldn't pay her debts quickly. Her demand for half my fortune wasn't just about greed or entitlement, it was about survival. This desperation explained the sophistication and ruthlessness of her current campaign. When facing loan sharks and potential violence, destroying family relationships probably seemed like an acceptable cost for obtaining the money she needed, but the most damaging discovery was evidence that Claire had been lying to Robert about her financial situation. While she'd convinced him that their debt problems were primarily his responsibility, stemming from his failed medical practice investment, the reality was that her gambling losses represented the majority of their combined debt. Robert believed they owed about $300,000, with most of that traceable to his business failure. He had no idea that Claire's hidden gambling addiction had created an additional $400,000 in debt, or that she'd been borrowing from dangerous sources to fund her continued playing. Marcus had also uncovered Claire's current gambling activity. Despite claiming to be focused on solving their financial crisis, she was still placing bets, smaller amounts, but consistently. The addiction was active and progressive, which meant that even if I gave her the $25 million she'd demanded, there was no guarantee she wouldn't gamble it away within months. The final piece of the puzzle was Claire's backup plan. If her family manipulation campaign failed to extract money from me, she'd been researching other options, selling fabricated stories to tabloid media about my business practices, filing false harassment claims that would require expensive legal defense, even potential identity theft and credit fraud using information she'd gathered about my accounts. Claire wasn't just desperate, she was prepared to destroy everything in her path if necessary. My refusal to give her money hadn't ended her campaign. It had simply moved her to more aggressive tactics on an escalating timeline. As I reviewed Marcus's comprehensive report, I realized I'd been underestimating both the scope of Claire's desperation and the danger she represented. This wasn't just family drama that could be resolved through better communication or compromise. This was a systematic threat from someone whose psychological makeup made her capable of almost anything. The woman, demanding half my fortune, had a documented history of manipulating and destroying people who refused to enable her behavior. She was facing physical threats from loan sharks, psychological pressure from hidden debts, and the complete collapse of the life she'd built on lies and borrowed money. But now, I had something I'd lacked before: complete information about who Claire really was and what she was capable of. The question was how to use that information to protect myself while exposing the truth to family members who'd been manipulated by her carefully constructed narratives. The time for defensive strategies was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The family meeting I'd demanded took place on a Saturday afternoon at my parents' house, neutral territory, where everyone would feel comfortable attending. I'd been strategic about the invitation, framing it as a necessary conversation to clear up misunderstandings about my situation with Claire. Most of the extended family had agreed to come. Curious about my side of the story, they'd only heard through Claire's carefully crafted narrative. I arrived early to set up my presentation materials. Yes, I was treating this like a business meeting, because that's exactly what it was. A presentation of facts designed to counter months of emotional manipulation and false narratives. Catherine Walsh had advised me to stick to documented evidence and let the facts speak for themselves. Claire arrived with Robert, looking nervous but maintaining her victim persona. She'd dressed carefully conservative clothing, minimal makeup, the picture of a responsible medical professional facing unfair persecution from her wealthy brother. Our parents flanked her supportively while extended family members took seats, with expressions ranging from curious to judgmental. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the front of the living room with my laptop connected to the television. "I've asked for this meeting because I believe you've been given incomplete information about my situation with Claire. I want to share some facts that I think will clarify things considerably." Claire's lawyer instincts immediately kicked in. "Marcus, I don't think a family meeting is the appropriate place for actually, Claire, since you made this a family issue by involving everyone in your pressure campaign. I think the family deserves to know the complete truth." I started with the timeline, displaying a simple chart showing Claire's demands and the family response. 3 weeks ago, Claire came to my office and demanded $25 million, exactly half of my estimated net worth. Not a loan, not help with specific expenses, but an outright demand based on her belief that family should share everything. Murmurs rippled through the room. I could see confusion on several faces. They'd been told Claire had asked for help, not demanded half my fortune. When I told her I needed time to consider such a massive request, she immediately launched a campaign to pressure me through all of you. Within 48 hours, I received calls from Mom, Dad, and several relatives, all delivering variations of the same message. I was being selfish and forgetting my family obligations. I displayed screenshots of the group text Claire had created, showing her message about my legal threats, and the responses from family members criticizing my character without knowing the details of her demand. Now, let me share some information about why Claire needs $25 million so urgently. This was where things got uncomfortable. I displayed Claire's debt summary, credit cards, gambling losses, hidden loans, and the timeline showing how her financial situation had deteriorated over 18 months. Claire has lost nearly $200,000 gambling online over the past year and a half. She owes another $400,000 to various creditors, including some who operate outside legal lending frameworks. Her total debt is approximately $700,000, money she owes because of choices she made, not circumstances beyond her control. Robert's face went white. He was clearly seeing some of these numbers for the first time. Claire was shaking her head, tears starting to form, but I continued methodically. But here's the most important fact. Claire has been hiding assets from this family for years while claiming she deserves shared access to mine. I displayed copies of our grandfather's will and the inheritance records. 5 years ago, Claire inherited $197,000 from Grandpa's estate, money that he specifically said he hoped would help his grandchildren build better lives. Money that Claire never mentioned to any of you. Despite her philosophy that family shares everything, the room was completely silent now. Our grandmother was staring at Claire with an expression of hurt confusion. "Grandpa left that money to both of us," our grandmother said quietly. "He mentioned in his letters that he hoped it would bring his grandchildren closer together." Claire was crying now, but I wasn't finished. That inheritance money, our grandfather's life savings, was gambled away over 2 years while Claire was building her narrative about being the responsible daughter who deserved family support. I moved to the next section, Claire's history of manipulation. I outlined the pattern with her medical school classmate, her residency colleagues, and her ex-boyfriend Michael, showing how she'd used identical tactics in each situation. "This isn't desperation causing poor judgment," I explained. "This is an established pattern of behavior. When Claire faces problems, she researches her target's vulnerabilities, constructs victim narratives, and enlists others in pressure campaigns, designed to extract what she wants without taking responsibility for her choices." Robert was staring at Claire with growing horror. "The gambling debts you told me our debt was from my practice failure. Robert, according to the financial records, Claire's gambling losses represent about 60% of your combined debt. You've been led to believe you're responsible for problems that are primarily of her creation." The revelation was devastating. Robert had been carrying guilt and financial responsibility for debts that weren't primarily his fault. He'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as our family had been. I displayed the final piece of evidence, Claire's strategic planning messages with Robert about their Marcus strategy, showing how they'd analyzed my personality and planned their manipulation approach. This demand for half my fortune wasn't a desperate sister asking for help. It was a calculated extraction plan, developed over months, designed to exploit my desire for family harmony and my fear of family rejection. Claire was sobbing now, but her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine. Another performance designed to deflect attention from the facts I was presenting. Marcus, please, she managed between sobs. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your sister. I'm still family. Are you? I asked quietly, because family doesn't research each other's assets for months while planning extraction strategies. Family doesn't hide inheritances while demanding shared access to others' success. Family doesn't orchestrate manipulation campaigns designed to emotionally blackmail their relatives. The room was completely quiet except for Claire's crying. I could see the wheels turning in everyone's minds as they processed information that completely contradicted the narrative they'd been fed for weeks. My Aunt Margaret spoke first. Claire, is this true? Did you really inherit money from Dad and not tell any of us? Claire's response was telling. Instead of denying the facts or apologizing for her deception, she immediately shifted to victim mode. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Medical school residency, trying to build a life with Robert. I made some bad decisions, but I never meant to hurt anyone. It was exactly the pattern Marcus Rivera had identified when confronted with evidence of her behavior. Claire immediately reframed herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the author of her choices. But the family wasn't buying it this time. They'd seen the documentation, understood the scope of her deception, and recognized the manipulation tactics they'd unknowingly participated in. My father, who'd been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. Claire, we need to talk, all of us, about what this means and how we move forward. I knew that conversation would be painful, but necessary. The family that had pressured me to enable Claire's behavior now understood. They'd been manipulated into supporting someone whose problems were largely self-created and whose methods involved systematic deception. But I wasn't staying for that discussion. I'd presented the facts and let them speak for themselves. What the family decided to do with that information was their choice. But they could no longer claim ignorance about who Claire really was or what she was truly capable of. The truth had finally emerged, and it was nothing like the story Claire had been telling. The aftermath of my presentation was swift and decisive. Within hours of the family meeting, my phone started buzzing with messages from relatives who'd participated in Claire's pressure campaign. The tone was dramatically different from the guilt-inducing calls I'd received weeks earlier. Marcus, I owe you an apology, my Aunt Margaret texted. I had no idea about the gambling or the inheritance. I'm horrified that I pressured you based on lies. We were completely manipulated, wrote my cousin David. I'm sorry for judging you without knowing the facts. Even my grandmother called, her voice shaky with emotion. Marcus, dear, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what Claire was really doing, I never would have asked you to help her. Your grandfather would be heartbroken to know his money was gambled away. But the most significant response came from Robert. He'd left the family meeting early, and I later learned he'd gone directly to his apartment to pack his belongings. By Sunday evening, he'd moved out of the house he shared with Claire and was staying with colleagues while he sorted through the wreckage of their relationship. His message to me was brief but revealing. Thank you for showing me who I was really engaged to. I've been living a lie for 2 years. Claire's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. The family support she'd manipulated for months had evaporated overnight. Her fiancé had discovered the extent of her deception and left. Her financial situation remained desperate, but now she faced it alone, without the allies she'd cultivated through systematic manipulation. But I underestimated her desperation and her willingness to escalate when conventional manipulation failed. Monday morning, I was in my office when my assistant Sarah rushed in, looking alarmed. Marcus, there's a woman here demanding to see you. She says she's your sister, and she's very upset. Claire had bypassed building security by claiming to be my sister dealing with a family emergency. She was sitting in our reception area, and I could hear her voice through the closed door, not crying or pleading, but angry in a way I'd never heard before. Send her in, I told Sarah, but stay nearby in case I need assistance. Claire entered my office looking nothing like the composed medical professional who'd made her initial demand weeks earlier. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who'd abandoned all pretense of rationality. You destroyed my life, she said without preamble, standing in front of my desk with her hands clenched into fists. I presented facts. Claire, if those facts destroyed your life, maybe you should examine the choices that created them. Don't give me that calm, rational bullshit. You humiliated me in front of our entire family. You turned everyone against me. You ruined my engagement and destroyed my reputation. I remained seated, keeping my voice level. I shared documented evidence of your behavior. The consequences you're experiencing are the natural result of your actions, not my presentation of them. But Claire was beyond rational discussion. She'd moved into the rage phase that Marcus Rivera had warned me about, the point where desperate people abandon strategic thinking and resort to direct confrontation. You think you're so superior with your money and your success, she spat. You think you can judge me because you got lucky with some computer program? But you're still the same pathetic loser who dropped out of Harvard and embarrassed our family. The insults were designed to provoke me, to make me respond emotionally rather than strategically. But I'd prepared for this moment and understood what was happening. Claire, you're upset and not thinking clearly. I think you should leave and we can discuss this later, when you've had time to process. No, she screamed, loud enough that I was sure Sarah could hear in the outer office. We're discussing this now. You owe me that money, Marcus. I'm your sister. I helped raise you. I supported you when no one else would. The rewriting of history was breathtaking. Claire had never supported me. She'd been my harshest critic and most consistent source of family disapproval. But in her current psychological state, she'd convinced herself that her victim narrative was reality. Claire, you never supported me. You called me a fool for leaving Harvard. You ignored my business success for years. You missed my birthday celebrations and avoided family events where I might be recognized. The only time you showed interest in my life was when you decided you wanted half my money. My calm recitation of facts seemed to enrage her further. She started pacing in front of my desk, her voice rising to near screaming levels. That's not true. I was always proud of you. I bragged about your success to my friends. I told everyone. My brother was a millionaire entrepreneur. Claire, you bragged about my success to enhance your own image, not because you were genuinely proud, and you only started doing that after my company became valuable enough to be worth mentioning. She slammed her hand on my desk, making my coffee cup jump. You're twisting everything. You're making me sound like some kind of monster, when all I did was ask my brother for help during the worst time of my life. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her, showing the financial records I'd presented to the family. You didn't ask for help, Claire. You demanded $25 million. You researched my assets for months. You planned manipulation strategies with Robert. You orchestrated a family pressure campaign based on lies about your situation. Those aren't lies. I am in trouble. I do need help. You're in trouble because you gambled away our grandfather's inheritance and accumulated hundreds of thousands in debt through reckless decisions. You need help, but not the kind you're demanding from me. Claire's face contorted with rage. Grandpa's money wasn't enough. It was barely anything. You've made $50 million, and you can't spare some for your own sister. The entitlement was staggering. She'd gambled away nearly $200,000 more, money than most people see in a lifetime, and dismissed it as barely anything, while demanding access to wealth I'd spent decades building. Claire, even if I gave you $25 million today, what happens when you gamble that away too? Your addiction is active. You're still placing bets even while claiming you need money to solve your financial crisis. Her face went white. She hadn't known I was aware of her continued gambling activity. I don't know what you're talking about. Online casino records. Claire, you placed bets 3 times last week while Robert was packing his belongings and your engagement was falling apart. You're not seeking money to solve your problems, you're seeking money to fund your addiction. The truth hit her like a physical blow. For a moment the rage left her face, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. But then the defensive mechanisms kicked back in. You had me investigated, you violated my privacy, you're obsessed with destroying me. I protected myself against someone who was systematically trying to manipulate and pressure me into giving away half my life's work. Everything I found was through legal channels. And I only looked because your behavior suggested I was dealing with something more serious than family disagreement. Claire started crying again, but these tears felt different, more genuine than her previous performances. You don't understand what it's like. The pressure, the debt, the people calling me, threatening me. I was desperate. For the first time in our conversation, she sounded like the sister I remembered from childhood, rather than the manipulative stranger she'd become. But I couldn't let sympathy cloud my judgment about the danger she represented. I understand desperation, Claire. I was desperate for years while building my business. The difference is that I never tried to solve my problems by stealing from family members or manipulating people who cared about me. It's not stealing. You're my brother. Family should help each other. And there it was again, the core delusion that my success belonged to her simply by virtue of shared genetics. No recognition of the work I'd put in, the risks I'd taken, the sacrifices I'd made, just entitlement to the results. Claire, family helps each other within reasonable bounds. Family doesn't demand half of everything someone has earned. Family doesn't hide assets while claiming others should share theirs. Family doesn't manipulate emotions and relationships to extract money. She was quiet for a moment, and I thought, maybe we were finally having a real conversation. But then her expression hardened again. Fine, you want to play hardball? You want to destroy me completely? I can play that game too. The threat was clear, and it activated my security training. What does that mean, Claire? It means you haven't seen desperate yet. It means if you won't help me voluntarily, find other ways to get what I need. I pressed the silent alarm button under my desk, a signal for security to respond without escalating the situation. Claire, you need to leave now. This conversation is over. This conversation is over when I say it's over. You owe me, Marcus. One way or another, you're going to pay what you owe. Security appeared in my doorway to professional guards who assessed the situation quickly and moved to escort Claire. From the building, she went with them, but not before delivering one final threat. This isn't finished. Marcus, family doesn't forget, and neither do the people I owe money to. After she was gone, I sat in my office trying to process what had just happened. The sister I'd once loved had threatened me in my own workplace, implied she might resort to illegal methods to get my money, and suggested that her loan shark creditors might become my problem. I called Catherine Walsh immediately. We need to escalate our legal protection. Claire just threatened me directly, and I think she's moving toward more dangerous tactics. I'll prepare emergency restraining order paperwork. And Marcus, I think you should consider personal security arrangements. Desperate people with gambling debts and loan shark pressure sometimes resort to extreme measures. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my attempt to resolve this family crisis with facts and transparency had only pushed Claire further toward desperation. She'd lost her manipulation allies, her romantic relationship, and her victim narrative in the span of 48 hours, but instead of accepting responsibility for her situation, she'd doubled down on blaming me for her problems. And a desperate person with nothing left to lose was capable of almost anything. The confrontation had clarified one crucial thing. This wasn't going to end with family reconciliation or reasonable compromise. Claire had declared war, and I needed to prepare for battle. Claire's threats weren't idle bluster. Within 24 hours of our office confrontation, I discovered she was escalating to tactics that could have destroyed everything I'd built if I hadn't been prepared. The first attack came through social media. Claire had created a detailed post about our family situation, but this version painted me as a wealthy brother who'd abandoned his struggling sister in her time of greatest need. She'd omitted the gambling addiction, the hidden inheritance, and her actual demands, instead framing the situation as a successful entrepreneur, refusing to help his doctor's sister pay for their father's medical expenses. The post went viral in medical and business communities, generating thousands of shares and comments condemning my apparent heartlessness. My company's social media accounts were flooded with negative messages from people who knew only Claire's carefully edited version of events. But Catherine Walsh had anticipated this possibility. Within hours, we'd posted a comprehensive response, including the documented evidence I'd shared with our family, the financial records, the manipulation timeline, and Claire's history of similar behavior with previous targets. The truth was devastating to her narrative, and the viral post quickly became a cautionary tale about believing one-sided stories. The second attack was more personal and potentially more damaging. Claire had contacted several of my key business relationships, claiming I was having personal issues that were affecting my judgment and professional capabilities. She'd reached out to investors, major clients, and industry partners with concerns about my mental health crisis and erratic behavior. This could have been catastrophic for DataSync. Business relationships depend on trust and stability, and even unfounded concerns about leadership problems can damage partnerships and future opportunities. But again, our preparation paid off. I'd proactively reached out to these same relationships after Claire's office visit, briefing them on the family situation and providing context for any unusual communications they might receive. When Claire's calls came, my business partners already understood they were dealing with a family member engaging in harassment rather than legitimate concerns about my well-being. The third attack crossed legal lines. Claire had somehow obtained copies of my personal financial statements documents that should have been secure and confidential. She'd shared these with family members and posted excerpts online, violating privacy laws and potentially compromising my financial security. Marcus Blackwell's investigation revealed how she'd gained access. Claire had convinced a bank employee that she was my wife dealing with a family emergency. Using social engineering tactics and information she'd gathered about my accounts, she'd talked her way into receiving documents she had no legal right to access. This wasn't just family drama anymore, it was identity theft and fraud. Catherine immediately filed criminal complaints and civil lawsuits, but the damage was already spreading. My private financial information was circulating online, creating security risks and privacy violations that would take months to fully address. But Claire's most dangerous escalation was her decision to involve her loan shark creditors in pressuring me. I discovered this when Marcus Blackwell's security monitoring detected unusual surveillance around my home and office, professional investigators following my movements, photographing my routines, and documenting my daily activities. The message was clear. Claire had told her dangerous creditors that her wealthy brother was the solution to her debt problems. If she couldn't convince me to pay voluntarily, perhaps external pressure would change my mind. This crossed every line I'd drawn about family loyalty and reasonable conflict. Claire wasn't just trying to manipulate me anymore, she was actively putting my safety at risk by involving criminals in our family dispute. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with Catherine Walsh and Marcus Rivera to discuss comprehensive protection strategies. We're dealing with someone who's completely abandoned rational boundaries, Catherine said, reviewing the latest incidents. The financial privacy violations, the business interference, and especially involving loan sharks and family pressure. Tactics. These aren't the actions of someone who can be reasoned with. Marcus was more direct. She's desperate enough to be dangerous, and she's connected to people who solve problems through intimidation and violence. You need personal security, and you need to completely cut off all access to your life. They were right. The sister I'd once loved was gone, replaced by someone whose desperation had made her capable of almost anything. Continuing to hope for family reconciliation wasn't just naive, was dangerous. That night, I wrote the most difficult letter of my life. It was addressed to my parents, but copies would go to every family member who'd been caught up in Claire's manipulation campaign. After extensive consideration and recent escalating events, I wrote, I'm announcing my decision to permanently sever all contact with Claire and anyone who continues to support her campaign against me. This isn't a negotiation or a temporary boundary, it's a final decision based on her demonstrated willingness to engage in illegal activities and threaten my safety. I outlined the recent escalations, the privacy violations, the business interference, and the involvement of dangerous creditors in our family dispute. I made it clear that anyone who continued to pressure me on Claire's behalf would also be cut off from my life. I understand this decision may seem harsh. The letter continued, but I refuse to maintain relationships with people who believe my success obligates me to enable destructive behavior or who think family bonds justify theft, fraud, and physical threats. The responses to my letter revealed the true character of various family relationships. Some relatives expressed understanding and support for my decision to protect myself. Others attempted to continue the manipulation, suggesting I was overreacting or abandoning family when Claire needed help most. My parents' response was the most disappointing but not surprising. They acknowledged that Claire had made mistakes but believed families should find ways to work through problems together. They couldn't or wouldn't recognize that some behaviors were unforgivable, that some violations of trust couldn't be repaired. She's still your sister, my mother had said during our final phone conversation. Whatever she's done, she's still family. No, Mom, she's not, I'd replied. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't threaten each other's safety. Family doesn't involve criminals and personal disputes. Claire stopped being my sister the moment she decided my success belonged to her. It was painful but liberating to finally say those words out loud. For months, I'd been trying to preserve relationships with people who demonstrated that their love was conditional on my willingness to be exploited. I'd been carrying guilt and responsibility for maintaining family bonds that had become fundamentally toxic. The decision to draw absolute boundaries freed me from that burden. I was no longer responsible for managing other people's emotions about my success. I was no longer obligated to maintain relationships with people who had proven they saw me as a resource rather than a person. Within a week, I'd implemented comprehensive security measures, professional bodyguards, enhanced home security systems, secure transportation arrangements, and complete information security protocols. My life looked different, but I felt safer and more peaceful than I had in months. The family that had pressured me to enable Claire's behavior was no longer part of my daily reality. The people who remained in my life, my employees, my close friends, my chosen family, were people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide them. Claire had forced me to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. She'd made it impossible to maintain both my safety and our relationship. Drawing that line was painful but necessary, and for the first time since this crisis began, I felt like I was finally protecting what truly mattered: my well-being, my business, and my future. The legal system moved faster than I'd expected once we had documented evidence of Claire's criminal behavior. The financial privacy violations, identity theft, and fraud charges created a compelling case that prosecutors were eager to pursue. Claire's desperation had led her to commit crimes with clear paper trails and multiple witnesses. Catherine Walsh had assembled an airtight case. Bank security footage showed Claire impersonating my wife to access confidential documents. Digital forensics revealed her social media manipulation campaign and the illegal sharing of my private financial information. Phone records connected her to the loan sharks who'd begun surveilling my properties. She made this easy for us, Catherine explained during a strategy session. Most financial crimes require complex investigations to establish intent and methodology. Claire documented everything herself. The criminal charges were filed simultaneously in federal and state courts. Identity theft and financial fraud were federal crimes, while the harassment and privacy violations fell under state jurisdiction. Claire was facing potential prison time, significant fines, and permanent damage to her medical license. But I was more interested in the civil remedies available. Catherine had filed comprehensive lawsuits seeking damages for the business interference, emotional distress, and security costs I'd incurred because of Claire's actions. We were also pursuing injunctive relief that would legally prohibit her from any future contact or harassment. The financial impact on Claire was immediate and devastating. The medical board suspended her license pending investigation of the criminal charges. Her hospital terminated her employment due to the negative publicity and ethical violations. Her malpractice insurance was canceled, making it impossible for her to practice medicine, even if the license suspension was lifted. Robert, meanwhile, had filed for dissolution of their engagement and was pursuing his own legal remedies. He'd discovered that Claire had forged his signature on several loan documents, making him liable for debts he'd never agreed to assume. His attorney was working to extricate him from financial obligations created through Claire's fraud. The loan sharks who'd been surveilling my properties suddenly found themselves under FBI investigation. Their intimidation tactics had crossed federal lines when they'd targeted me based on Claire's false representations. Several arrests were made, and their operation was shut down entirely. Claire's response to the legal consequences revealed the depth of her psychological dysfunction. Instead of accepting responsibility or seeking help for her gambling addiction, she doubled down on her victim narrative. Her attorney, a public defender, since she could no longer afford private counsel, attempted to portray her as a desperate sister, driven to extreme measures by her brother's heartless refusal to help. The strategy might have worked if we hadn't documented her pattern of behavior so thoroughly. Claire's history of manipulating previous victims, her strategic planning with Robert, and her escalating criminal activities painted a picture of someone whose actions were calculated rather than impulsive. The preliminary hearing was a revelation. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to prosecutors outline Claire's crimes with clinical precision, I finally understood how completely she'd separated from reality. She genuinely seemed to believe that her actions were justified responses to my unreasonable behavior. When given the opportunity to speak, Claire addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, my brother has $50 million. I asked for help during the worst crisis of my life, and he responded with lawyers and threats. Everything I did was because I was desperate and afraid." The judge's response was swift and unforgiving. "Ms. Blackwell, desperation doesn't justify identity theft, fraud, or involving criminal organizations in family disputes. Your brother's wealth doesn't create legal obligations for him to solve your financial problems, especially problems created through gambling addiction and poor decision-making." Claire was released on bail pending trial, but the conditions were strict. No contact with me or my business associates, no access to financial institutions without court supervision, and mandatory addiction counseling. Her world had shrunk to court-supervised rehabilitation programs and part-time work in a medical clinic that specialized in treating uninsured patients. The broader consequences extended beyond Claire herself. Family members who'd participated in her pressure campaign faced social and legal scrutiny. My parents, who'd enabled her manipulation while ignoring my explanations, found themselves isolated from extended family, who now understood their role in the crisis. Several relatives apologized to me directly, acknowledging that they'd been manipulated into supporting someone whose behavior was indefensible. Others, particularly my parents, maintained that I was overreacting and that family problems should be handled privately rather than through the legal system. But the most satisfying consequence was the protection the legal system provided. The restraining orders and court-supervised conditions meant that Claire couldn't continue her harassment campaign. The financial judgments we were pursuing would ensure she couldn't profit from her criminal behavior. The criminal charges would create a permanent record that would prevent her from victimizing others in the future. Marcus Rivera's security monitoring confirmed that the external threats had disappeared entirely. The loan sharks who'd been surveilling my properties were either arrested or had moved on to other activities. Claire's creditors had learned that targeting me was legally and practically pointless. For the first time in months, I could focus on my business and personal life without constantly watching for the next escalation in Claire's campaign. DataSync was thriving despite the temporary disruption caused by her interference. Our clients had rallied around us once they understood the true nature of the family crisis, and several had expressed admiration for how professionally we'd handled the situation. The media attention, which had initially favored Claire's victim narrative, shifted dramatically once the criminal charges became public. Business publications wrote about the case as a cautionary tale about family financial manipulation, and several featured my story as an example of how successful entrepreneurs could protect themselves against exploitation. But the most meaningful consequence was personal. I'd finally learned to value my own well-being over family approval. The guilt and obligation that had controlled my relationships for decades had been replaced by clear boundaries and honest assessments of people's character. Claire had forced me to choose between enabling her destructive behavior and protecting my own interests. By choosing self-preservation, I'd discovered that I didn't need family relationships that required me to ignore illegal behavior or accept manipulation as the price of belonging. The legal system had provided justice in ways that family discussions never could. Claire faced real consequences for her actions. I was protected from future harassment, and the truth about her behavior was officially documented and recognized. 6 months after her initial demand for half my fortune, Claire was facing prison, time, financial ruin, and the complete collapse of the life she'd built on manipulation and deception. It wasn't revenge, it was the natural consequence of choices she'd made and actions she'd taken. Justice, I discovered, sometimes looked like a courtroom where the truth finally mattered more than family loyalty or emotional manipulation, and that truth had set me free in ways I'd never expected. ***, 1 year later, I stood in my new home office looking out at the Pacific Ocean, reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. I'd moved to California 6 months earlier, partly for DataSync's expansion into West Coast markets, but mostly because I'd wanted a fresh start in a place where family drama couldn't follow me. The house was beautiful, a modern architectural masterpiece perched on a cliff overlooking Monterey Bay. But what made it special wasn't the $1,000,000 view or the custom finishes. It was the peace I felt here, the absence of the constant anxiety that had defined my life during Claire's campaign of manipulation and harassment. Claire herself was serving an 18-month sentence in federal prison. She'd ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple charges rather than face trial, probably on her attorney's advice that the evidence against her was overwhelming. The plea agreement included restitution payments that would continue for years, assuming she ever rebuilt the earning capacity to make them. More importantly, she was finally receiving treatment for her gambling addiction. The court-mandated counseling had evolved into genuine therapeutic work, and according to reports from her probation officer, she was making progress in understanding how her behavior had affected others. I felt no satisfaction about her imprisonment, but I wasn't carrying guilt about it either. Claire had made choices that led to criminal behavior, and she was experiencing the natural consequences of those choices. My role had been to protect myself, not to enable her descent into illegal activities. The family relationships that had survived this crisis were stronger and more honest than ever before. My grandmother, who'd initially been manipulated into pressuring me, had become one of my closest allies. She'd apologized sincerely for her role in Claire's campaign and had worked to understand how she'd been deceived. I was so focused on keeping the family together that I ignored what was actually happening, she'd told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I thought family loyalty meant supporting everyone equally, but I understand now that loyalty can't ignore harmful behavior. Several cousins and extended family members had reached out to rebuild relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. We'd developed genuine friendships, freed from the artificial constraints of family dynamics that had never really worked. But the most meaningful change was in my chosen family, the people who'd proven their loyalty through action rather than genetic connection. Sarah, my longtime assistant, had become a trusted friend and business partner. The employees who'd stood by DataSync during the crisis had evolved into something closer to family than most of my actual relatives. Marcus Rivera, who'd helped protect me during the worst of Claire's escalation, had become both a security consultant and a close friend. We'd bonded over the shared experience of dealing with family members whose love came with impossible conditions. "You know what I admire most about how you handled this situation?" Marcus had said during a recent dinner. "You never tried to destroy Claire out of anger or revenge. You just refused to let her destroy you." He was right. Throughout the entire crisis, I'd focused on protection rather than retaliation. I'd shared facts rather than attacking Claire's character. I'd set boundaries rather than seeking punishment. The legal consequences she'd faced were the result of her own criminal behavior, not my desire for revenge. DataSync had not only survived the family crisis but had thrived because of how we'd handled it. Clients had been impressed by our professionalism. Under pressure, employees had gained confidence in leadership that prioritized integrity over convenience. Industry partners had strengthened relationships with a company that demonstrated clear ethical boundaries. We'd grown from a $50 million company to one valued at over $75 million in the year since Claire's first demand. Stress and distraction of family warfare had been replaced by focused energy and clear priorities. Success felt more meaningful. When it wasn't shadowed by family guilt and manipulation, my personal life had improved dramatically as well. I'd started dating again someone I'd avoided during the years when family approval seemed more important than personal happiness. I'd met Rebecca, a brilliant environmental lawyer who understood both professional success and the complexity of family relationships. "The fact that you protected yourself without trying to destroy your sister tells me everything I need to know about your character," she'd said early in our relationship. "You found a way to be strong without being cruel." Rebecca had become part of my chosen family, along with close friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide them. We'd created traditions and celebrations that felt more authentic than the obligatory family gatherings I'd endured for years. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. The guilt that had controlled my decision-making for decades was gone, replaced by clear thinking about relationships and boundaries. I'd learned to distinguish between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. I discovered that saying no to unreasonable demands wasn't selfish, it was necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. I'd learned that protecting my own well-being didn't make me a bad person. It made me someone capable of genuine generosity rather than obligation-driven sacrifice. The money that Claire had demanded, that $25 million she'd felt entitled to, had been put to much better use. I'd established a foundation focused on financial literacy and addiction recovery, helping people avoid the kind of destructive patterns that had consumed my sister's life. The foundation's work felt meaningful in ways that simply giving Claire money never would have. We were addressing root causes rather than enabling consequences. We were helping people build better lives rather than subsidizing poor decisions. Standing in my office that morning, I thought about the journey from Claire's initial demand to my current peace and success. She'd forced me to choose between family, approval, and self-respect, between enabling her behavior and protecting my own well-being. At the time, those choices had felt impossible. Family loyalty was supposed to be unconditional, wasn't it? Success was supposed to come with obligations to help relatives, right? But I'd learned that real family loyalty sometimes meant refusing to enable destructive behavior. I'd discovered that true success included the wisdom to protect what you'd built from people who wanted to claim it as their own. The little girl who used to share Halloween candy with me was still there in my memories, untainted by the person Claire had become. I mourned her loss while celebrating my freedom from the manipulation and entitlement that had replaced her. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Still on for dinner tonight. I'm excited to hear about the Foundation's new program launch." I smiled, looking forward to sharing my work with someone who genuinely cared about my happiness and success. This was what family was supposed to feel like: supportive, encouraging, built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Claire had demanded half of everything I'd earned, believing that family bonds entitled her to the fruits of my labor. Instead, she'd given me something far more valuable: the clarity to distinguish between people who loved me and people who simply wanted to use me. That clarity had cost me some relationships, but had given me the foundation for building better ones. It had freed me from family guilt while opening space for genuine family love. It had taught me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their worst impulses. As I prepared for another day of meaningful work with people I genuinely cared about, I realized that Claire's manipulation campaign had failed completely. She'd wanted half my fortune and had ended up giving me something worth far more: the knowledge that I deserved relationships based on love rather than exploitation, and that knowledge had set me free to build the life I'd always wanted: one where success felt like joy rather than obligation, where family meant chosen love rather than genetic burden, and where the future held promise rather than the weight of other people's expectations. The sun was setting over Monterey Bay, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was beautiful, peaceful, and entirely mine to enjoy without guilt, manipulation, or the demand that I share it with people who'd never appreciated what I'd built. For the first time in my life, I was truly free, and it felt like coming home.